I want to speak to you about this learning process, about, as you said, that people standing up are willing to be like, I don't know anything. Now,
Yeah.
um, in this day and age, in this opinion-based social media society that we live in, it feels like
Hmm.
everybody has an opinion and they back it 100%. They never want to back down from it. And we also
Yeah.
have a real a PC culture where if you offend somebody, you're at risk of being cancelled for the rest of time immemorial, you know? So,
Yeah.
and I find this very difficult, like a tightrope to walk down. Like even having this conversation with you, I've had to really think like, I really hope I don't say anything stupid. You know, like not because you're gonna be offended, because we know each other. So in that sense,
Yeah.
we have a really good relationship. So I know that you'll
Yeah.
take it
Exactly.
from my intention. But somebody who doesn't
Mhm.
know me, who's listening to this conversation for the first time, like I really feel like I'm walking a tightrope. Now,
Yeah.
do you think that's the right approach? And how can we make it easier for people to understand people who are different to them, not just from the trans community, like communities in general?
Yeah. Well, it might sound harsh, but I do actually think it's good that you feel uncomfortable having the
Mm,
conversation, because I think in any space where you don't know about someone who is part of like a marginalized community, you should feel uncomfortable about your ignorance, because it's not, they shouldn't be obligated to educate you.
mm,
Like, you know, we've got Google now, we've got all of
mm.
these great like sort of learning platforms. It's not like you have to go to the library and find a book. um, you can educate yourself if you really want to. So I do want to say that the onus shouldn't be on the community, regardless of what that community is. Like we saw something that I saw that was really big about when the Black Lives Matter
Mm.
moment really kicked off, was I saw a lot of my Black friends tweeting, just saying, guys, like this time is really hard for us, and it's not our responsibility to educate you. Like if we want to educate you and we feel strong enough to do that, we'll tell you and we'll ask you to ask us questions, and we'll, you know, let you ask questions. But it's not our responsibility to do that, and you should feel uncomfortable asking questions because you should know this stuff.
Mm.
um, and that's not saying you should know this stuff in a sense of like you should automatically have this knowledge. It's saying you should care enough for that community that you want to do the research for yourself. Now, having said that, I also think I really encourage people asking questions. Like, especially when I first came out, I went around and tried to sit with all of our close like family members, my aunts and uncles and stuff, and was sort of like, listen, like, I don't want you to like mince your words. I want you to ask the questions the offensive way, because then we'll just get to the point quicker,
Yeah.
and I can explain to you how to act around someone that you know you might not know and you don't have this rapport with. So I think you need to be sensitive to the person. Like if the person isn't strong enough to take those questions, don't ask them. But find someone who is strong enough to sort of be like, I want to answer your questions. I want to educate you. And I want you to, you know, think about your words, but also not be afraid of asking questions. That's my sort of philosophy. Is like, I don't want people to just ask me the straight thing, like the first thing off the top of their head without thinking about it.
Mm.
Because I think that shows a lack of sensitivity and honestly just respect on their part for my personhood. But at the same time, I really respect people wanting to learn and wanting to educate
Yeah.
themselves. So I still want people to ask questions. I just think about the questions before you ask
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting what you said. A few things there about like having the conversation with yourself first before you have a conversation with you. I think that's what you're saying to me. Like, okay, fine.
Yeah,
Like I know that I was going to speak to you or someone from the Black Lives Matter community, for example. Now, I
yeah,
need to have the conversation within myself. Like, what is my ignorance? What don't I understand? And why don't I understand it? Right.
yeah,
And before then asking a question. And I think that's very important. And as you said correctly, there is Google out there. There is so many platforms like YouTube and
yeah,
so many podcasts on so many different things now that you can have access to parts of your ignorance that you've uncovered yourself. The only
yeah, exactly.
the only caveat I have with this is the fact that I don't know if people actually care enough to research,
Yeah.
right? So
Well, so
like,
this is, yeah.
yeah,
I was just going to say, that's what I
go
was
for it.
going to say. Like, yeah, I definitely understand that it is a lot easier to ask questions when
Yeah.
you're sitting in front of a person. And I always like, if someone asks me a question and they could have found out the answer on Google, I'm not going to be like, oh, don't ask me, Google it. But I think that comes from sort of, you've got to think about the person that you're talking to. Like if you're talking to someone who's already quite vulnerable and sensitive, maybe they're not the right person to be asking those questions to. If you're with someone who's very sort of like open and strong and happy to, I'm complimenting myself here, who's happy to answer those questions, go for it. I always really encourage that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's a really weird time to be alive, where people have opinions about things they actually don't really care about. Because if you didn't really care about it, you'd actually research it and you'd actually find, because there is things that I've looked online and I'm still, I wouldn't say ignorant, but I'm still questioning. But I think it's one of those things that, firstly, I have to just respect other people's like identities. You know, if somebody, I don't want to sound stupid, but if somebody wants to identify themselves as X, for example, then at the end of the day, how is it really affecting me? If that's making them happy, you do your thing, innit? You know, and I think that should be number one. Like, in the day, I don't really care why people get so offended by other people choosing different identities. Like, let people do what they want to do. But there is a larger conversation that we need to have. And I think about this pronouns things as well. Like, now that when I look on Twitter, I see people putting like him, her, or she, and I would her.
Yeah, she, her. Yeah.
Sorry, I had to blank that.
That's cool.
But again, with this pronoun thing now, I didn't first understand why people were doing this, because I thought like, isn't it just a bit obvious, like, you know? But do you think like this? We should be into, like, when you meet somebody new now, do you expect to have that conversation initially? Like, I'm Kieran and I want to be known as this and that. How does that work?
Yeah, it's a tricky one to sort of to balance between like normal social interaction and being kind and respectful. I think the whole putting your pronouns in your social media platforms and stuff is really good, and that is because even myself, I don't always pass. I'm putting that in air quotes. I've just realized that it's a podcast and you can't see my air quotes.
Hello, this will be passing. YouTube, so.
Okay. Passing means when you sort of are perceived as the gender that you identify with. So even now, sometimes like I get called the wrong pronouns and stuff like that. And that's why putting your pronouns in your social media is important, because it means that even though it might be obvious for some people, you know, like I might look at your social media and be like, obviously he, him, that's your pronouns. But it makes this space for them people who might not pass as well to put their pronouns in their bio and not feel self-conscious about it, because it's cool that you're seeing so many more people putting their pronouns on Twitter and stuff, because before, what it used to be like was only trans people would have their pronouns in their bio. So that would be a sort of immediate spot then for someone who wanted to comment hate and stuff like that they'd see the pronouns in that person's bio. They'd be like, this person's trans, let me go attack them. Yeah. And that's what it is. It's more an act of solidarity and act of support, of being like, you know, I understand that it's hard for some people to say what their pronouns are, so I'm going to do it so that it's easier for you to do it too. That's where that comes from. In terms of introducing yourself with your pronouns, it's something that I think should be done, but that's in a group setting. So like, you know, I met at an arts meeting the other day, and we all sort of went around and introduced ourselves with our pronouns, but that's because we were all introducing ourselves formally. I think if you're just, you know, meeting and you've like a friend's friend or something, you don't need to be like, hi, my pronouns are this, that. Unless they introduce themselves with their pronouns. If they straight off say like, oh, my name's Alison and my pronouns are they, them, then you should reply by being like, okay, I'll say my pronouns too. But it's just that mirroring thing of just giving other people space to feel comfortable in their gender.
Yeah, because as you said, like, I think social norms are something that gets developed over time, right? Like before, like I think how we introduce ourselves 100 years ago to how we introduce ourselves now, and obviously changes within time, within how society evolves. And as this pronoun way of putting in social media and stuff, to begin with, I didn't understand. But now, after listening to you and seeing that even like someone like Jeremy Corbyn who has been like identified as male his whole life, has put it on his social media bio and stuff like that. It is true. It does give a lot of solidarity, and it makes it supposedly clearer for everybody as well in this time. And the only again, it's this idea of so I'm not sure if you know about Jordan Peterson and his fiasco that happened in Canada. Like he had this whole media storm, and because I think in Canada what they were trying to do was force people to say the right pronouns.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. And I think that's when he was like, no, like if somebody says that, can you introduce me as this? I will say, of course I will say that to them.
Yeah.
You can't force this on people. And I think it is really a weird time where people are feeling like this PC culture is making them forcing their language and forcing their restrictions. And to some extent, I do understand that. But how are we then going to make it easier for the minorities in a society to feel comfortable, right?
Yeah, well, I think that's where, again, it's quite nuanced, because I think even just the ease with which we now say, like, oh, that's so PC, is kind of, the phrase political correctness is not, it's the one that we use, but it's not the one that I think correctly describes the culture that using the right pronouns and stuff like that is trying to envisage. Political correctness suggests that there is a correct way, like that there's some correct, amazing, perfect form of society where everyone's like massive, like entirely respectful, does everything correctly. And we're human beings, like nothing is ever going to be correct. And then that putting the word political into it is another big problem that I have with it, because it immediately politicizes someone's existence. Like, a gay man's right to love another man is not something political, that's something human. So I agree that political correctness is, a bit of a minefield. It's very easy to get cancelled because of cancel culture and stuff like that. But I just think that our actions and the way that we perform our behaviors and just our everyday life should be just considerate. Like, it sounds really basic, but my philosophy is basically just like, be a nice person. If they're not hurting anyone else, fine. If they're hurting someone else, then that's an issue that I'm going to have to take up. But if someone wants to use like zim pronouns, I might have a difficult time remembering it, but is it hurting me in any way? Is it hurting anyone else in any way? No, not really. So like, okay, fine.